Sam, call to order and the rescheduled June
Love
26th
that first chart.
to June 27th meeting of the Scarborough Housing Alliance.
Because it's not.
And here we are. Thanks everybody for being here. And we'll start with an approval of the minutes from April 24th.
So move.
Great, thank you, Bill. Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? They were lovely. All in favor?
Yeah.
Aye. Great, thanks, everybody. That's excellent. Karen and Lauren.
All right,
stuff like
so
this.
we'll do a brief introduction and then we'll turn it over to our consultant here. So as you guys are aware, we came to you a few months ago to talk about a project that was funded with the Community Development Block Grant funds for planning. And we were interested in assessing the level of people experience or the number of people experiencing homelessness in Scarborough. And so we designed a project that had two phases. One phase was really going out in the field and identifying and interviewing folks. And the second phase was, okay, now that we have some information, what should we do? You know, what are the options that the town of Scarborough might be interested in doing? And so Lauren and her team really worked with the out in the field. And I don't know if you want to recap what some of that or.
Yes, I can very briefly recap. I know that I did the presentation for you folks via Zoom, I think, with most of that information several months ago. I don't remember exactly when that was. But pretty much what we saw as a whole was a decline in the unhoused population here in Scarborough. With that said, we certainly still have unhoused individuals. We have a couple of encampments, very minimal, but we do still have those exist. We have a handful of people in motels under our general assistance program that would be unhoused if they were not receiving our assistance. We have a handful of people in their own apartment or house that would be unhoused if they weren't receiving general assistance. We have a couple of folks that we, deal with, and they sometimes will utilize either like a shelter, sober living room, some sort of a very short-term shelter, and then they're back unhoused. So roughly, I would say about 10 to 15 individuals we're dealing with here in Scarborough. And I think we're just continuing to try to be creative. And how do we, get them safe and secure housing if they want it? Also proactively be looking at folks that might be on the cusp or that edge of becoming unhoused and becoming creative on how to keep them in a safe and secure, either housing or shelter. So Cullen is an expert who we have worked with several times around housing, and I'll let you introduce yourself a little bit more, but we thought it would be very appropriate to kind of consult with him a bit around what the data was that we found, and then start to kind of brainstorm those next steps. So.
And Cullen's going to do his presentation, and then if there's still time, I did provide a little bit of background on housing supply in Scarborough, which is really part of this whole continuum of housing provisions. So if there's time, we'll go through this. If not, you've got the information and we can come back another time for that.
Thank you, Karen. Thank you. And so my name is Cullen Ryan. I'm the Executive Director of Community Housing at Maine. I've been working in the field of homelessness for 37 years. I worked in Vermont and Minneapolis, and then came to Maine in 1997 and started overseeing the Oxford Street Shelter, our largest shelter at the time in Maine. And then all the services, all the homeless services for the city of Portland. I've been at Community Housing Maine for the last 2 decades. So we're the largest housing provider for homeless populations in the state. So what I have is a presentation because I think there are different choices and really key critical choices that the municipality can make around how it's going to address homelessness. And if it makes the wrong turn, it can really, I think, come back to haunt you. And if it makes the right series of choices, then I think it can set the municipality on the right course for everybody, for people who experience homelessness, for the town, for the businesses. So I've got a PowerPoint I'll go through. Sounds like I've got about 30 minutes or so. But I'll leave time for questions. And so the bottom line is really basic stuff on here, but no one does well without housing. So just keep that in mind. So if people have, serious and persistent mental illness, if they have substance use disorder, none of them are better for being unhoused, just like you and I wouldn't be. And everyone does much better when they have housing. So just keep those two things in mind, that the end goal is housing. We want everybody housed. Everybody deserves housing. And there's complex reasons why we've landed with people who are homeless in the first place, and then increasing numbers of people who are unsheltered while homeless. And that is a bigger problem. But I just want to say that the issue of homelessness is completely solvable. We know how to do it for every single population. When you break it down according to what the different populations are, we know what to do with each of them, and it starts to become a more manageable situation that's solvable. It's about us putting resources in the right place. It's always going to involve housing and services. So let's see. Yes. Okay. So the thing to think about is the most noticeable group of people who are homeless are those people who generally are single adults and chronically homeless. And that means that their homelessness goes beyond just circumstances such as poverty or just falling behind on rent or something about housing affordability, and into things that underlie it that are complex, like serious and persistent mental illness, substance use disorder. But we can assume that poverty is an underlying area, and that people in this population, really anyone who's touching into homelessness, is going to have some experience something that's not going to help their self-esteem. It may have long-standing consequences like trauma. It may be short thing, just falling on those kind of hard times and having a tough time digging your way out. So when you have, I guess the best way to describe is that we know that stress is a killer. It actually takes people down, and that arguably the most stressful situation that somebody can be in is chronic homelessness. So you take somebody who has serious and persistent mental illness, you leave them to their own devices. They're outside trying to fend for themselves. Somebody with serious and persistent mental illness essentially is defined by having symptoms of psychosis. So they are not oriented to person, place, or time. And every one of those symptoms is exacerbated by stress. So arguably the most stressful situation to be in is chronic homelessness. So what do we see? But somebody who's often flirtily psychotic, unable to make good decisions, not clear about what's going on, but also very scared and often very defensive about what's going on, because they're very worried about that they might be crazy or something like that. And so people will become isolated and isolative and paranoid and sort of distant, and also tell people that they're fine and they don't need any help and just leave me alone. I've got this under control. When actually, when you look on the outside, anyone can see they're not doing well. And so it's a matter of us shifting our focal point to what can we do to help from the outside that allows that person on the inside to get well. And the pathway to housing is where we want to go. So this housing is actually the pathway to housing, and particularly true for unsheltered homelessness, because really bad things happen when people are unsheltered. So I'll go into that a little bit later. In terms of addressing this population, we want to house them. Can't find housing, we want to make sure that they're safely indoors. Maine has traditionally had 98% of its homeless population indoors. That's vastly different than California. Los Angeles has had about 90% of its population outdoors and 10% in shelters. So when that problem got worse, they're really caught off guard with insufficient shelter capacity. They're trying to manage homelessness with people in encampments. It's a very challenging, extremely expensive proposition to move somebody who is unsheltered into housing. And so we have a better pathway if we can get ourselves back to where we've got almost all people inside. We win. And I think for a municipality the size of Scarborough and the numbers that you're talking about, getting all people inside is absolutely achievable, and something that should be, just a thing. Like, that's the way we do things here. Nobody is outside. So living outside is not good. Neither are these sweeps, and you'll see people who there's sort of a move of a thought process of people who are kind of, I had described well as civil libertarians, people who really think people should be able to make all the choices they want, even if they're poor choices. And so you'll see people who push back on this idea that we shouldn't sweep encampments. And it is not good for people to arrest people. It's not good for people to criminalize homelessness. It is traumatic for people to leave encampments, but that should not stop us from insisting that people come inside. And that's a mindset. That's a very, it is deciding that we are going to be insistent that people come indoors. We're create space for them. We're going to make a pathway for them to get there. That is a way to actually move people from indoors, from outdoors to indoors, without it being, we're just going to sweep you out of here and now you move along to somewhere else. So you can't just kind of push the problem with the road, say you can't be here, got to be somewhere else, and hope that the people are going to be able to solve that or we're going to be better for that. You have to actually do something that engages the person, helps them to get indoors, create space for them, and make that happen. So clearly in Maine, where it gets cold in the winter, it's dangerous to be outside, people die. It's also dangerous when it's really hot, and that includes Maine. So we need space indoors for people. Scarborough doesn't necessarily have it, but it's possible for us to come up with strategies to make that happen. I'll talk about that later. So structure is key. When we leave people without any structure, we see bad things happen. I'll talk more about unsheltered homelessness, but one thing to look at is the lens of substance use disorder. So we know that we're amidst an opioid crisis in Maine. I actually have some statistics. I should have had those more ready, but I know where they are here, so I'll just throw them. I'll get back to them here. But yeah, there they are. In 2023, we had, according to Maine drug data, which is relatively new, Gordon Smith from the Mills administration has been tracking this and helping to try to help the state solve its opioid crisis. There were 607 fatal overdoses in Maine in 2023. It's a lot. Now that's less than last year, which is good. We were over closer to 700. But out of those 607 people who died, 73 or 12% were amongst the homeless population. That's huge because when you actually look at it, there's only 6,000 people who are homeless in Maine. When you look at the other 533, that's out of a population in 2023 of 1,395,000 people. That means that a person who is homeless was 32 times more likely to die of a fatal overdose than a person in the general population who are housed. That's remarkable. So when people are left outside, and I would argue, and I don't have statistics to back this, but I would argue that the highest percentage of people who are likely to die, fatal overdoses, are the people who are unsheltered. And the structured shelter offers support. I'll just give you, it is data, but it's not, it's not necessarily the best thing. But in 2023, I'll go through how this happened. But my organization has been involved with 4 other organizations in creating a brand new type of design. It's called ultra low barrier housing first. And basically, we move people in even without a lease, who have been the most difficult to serve. We've never found another solution. They've never come inside. We never brought them into housing. And we just essentially walk somebody in and say, hey, Brian, you're going to live inside now. You're all set. And it subtracts the stress. It's working. But there's a group of people who've been working to house the most difficult. And we put asterisks next to the name of people who we think really need this ultra low barrier type of situation. We have about 19 people asterisks with their next to name. Okay. 3 people on that list died in May of 2023 in one encampment alone in Portland of fatal overdoses. Fast forward a little bit later, and I'll get to these statistics. When we move people inside, 90% of people inside in Portland, we saw a month in Portland, Maine, where not a single person died of a fatal overdose in the entire city. So 3 in one small encampment, 80 people or so. So that, I think, gives you the dynamics here. It's not perfect statistics. It is sort of just, this is but I think that you can draw a conclusion there that it makes sense for us to get people into shelter. And what's different, people are still using when they're in shelter, but now you've got trained staff who can provide Narcan, keep people alive. You've got people who can support in other areas. And we've been able to get people housed. When we move people inside, there's already been 52 housing placements since we brought people inside to a shelter. Whereas in the same period of time since that's happened, when people were outside last summer. And by the way, do people see the unsheltered explosion in Portland last year? Okay, if you saw that, it was pretty remarkable. But I'm not aware of a single person who got housed. Maybe 1, maybe 2, but we've had 52 of that same group once we've got them to shelter. So it makes a difference in terms of our end goal if we have people inside this. So When people are in encampments, it's essentially something I call the carnival effect. People are attracted to this idea of that they don't want to miss it. It's amazing, and people will come out of the woodworks to be a part of an encampment because it looks like fun there, or there's something going on. And we even had tents in Portland that were used for weekends by people coming in from other areas. I wanted to be part of this whole thing. What happens when you draw a big cluster of people together who have a low self-esteem, who have a propensity or are involved with substance use disorder or serious and persistent mental illness, it invites people to come to pray. And they come and try to get people more involved with substances so that they can pull them into human trafficking situations and basically make use of that human being for non-good things. So encampments are miserable existence. Even if people say, I'm fine here, I want to live here, I don't want to come inside, I don't believe it. It's miserable. And today's a nice day, might be okay, but you can probably imagine the day when it would probably suck to be outside. You know it, and they know it, and they're not going to tell you, because I think people believe that this is what I deserve, or this is the best I can do, and kind of leave me alone. So remember that it's not a wonderful thing to be in an encampment or staying outside. And even if any of you have spent a long time, tenting across the country or doing a long trip, it gets old quick. It gets much more old in a unsupervised setting where all kinds of things are going on. So anyways, I just want to make sure that people know that there are going to be people who are going to tell you from flat out, I belong here, I'm fine, leave me alone. And that it's important that the municipality thinks better of the possibilities for a human being than that they should exist outside in Maine. And it's on us to read between the lines to get there. And we actually have to also factor in the deeper connection. These people look out for me, they've got my back. But if people are dying, they don't really have their back. It's not like what happens when there's supervision and people, sort of adults in the room, they're looking after trained professionals.
And Helen, on that,
Yes.
on that point, I feel like when we talk to people about homelessness in Scarborough, one of the things that people always bring up is, no, some people don't want to come in.
Right.
So that's an important
Very
piece for me to understand, for a response to that.
Yeah. I think we have to decide, and this is a turning point in our civilization, whether we think that it is acceptable for human beings to be living outside in 2024. And if we decide it is, believe me, it will happen, because it's happening in other parts of the country. It's going to be really hard to dig out. But if we decide it isn't, and we actually invest in it, we will get people inside. So it's a mindset. Moving people from housing directly from encampments is challenging, but it's possible. So we need to put some energy towards that. We don't want to give up on that. But when we move people inside, we then really can engage people, help their self-esteem, help them get everything they need to get into housing, and it actually works. So targeted collaborative work. And creating space for that to happen is really important. If you don't have it, there's a way to do that, and I'll talk about that later. So thoughtful structure, 3 keys. We want to make sure that we have indoor space. So I've said that about 5 or 6 times here now. It's really important. We need to lower barriers and make sure that we are addressing needs. That what is keeping people from coming inside? Is it a pet that they have? Is it that they want to be with a partner that they're with outside, and so I can't come in because of that? Is it they think that they are not going to be able to use substances? Well, anyone who's gone to high school knows that if you want to use substances in a place where it's not allowed, they're probably going to get away with it, right? So it's not, we're not going to stop people from using substances in any way. So it's a matter of engaging and saying, we need you inside, and we're going to make it safe for you. Set a timeline to close encampments. If you've got people outside, if you've got people who are scattered out, try to help them individually. Do it thoughtfully, respectfully, and give lots of notice. And then also be prepared for some flexibility, because what happens is that people who are single adults, particularly who are facing homelessness in their 30s, 40s, 50s, have a lot of unresolved adolescence. So they're going to, if you go in there with you got to do this, authority figure style, they're going to butt right up against it and get stuck. So we have to find a way that works around that, where there's a little bit of flexibility. It's like we said you have to be out of here today. Well, what if it happened tomorrow, would we all be okay? And maybe that's a better outcome if we actually get the person inside than if it happened on the date that we happen to random. So be thinking about that. Work with the person to get them inside, be persistent. And criminalizing homelessness is actually not helpful. That just actually makes it more challenging for people to get into housing because it adds to low self-esteem, records, barriers to getting into housing. Anybody who's housed somebody, Brian, Bill, others, it's like when people have got that record, it makes it more complicated inside. So that doesn't help. All right, and yet you need accountability, and that's through relationship work. So police are getting really good at doing relationship work with people. That's a change, a paradigm shift from some earlier efforts where it's like, we're gonna just do it this way. So relationship work is key. What do you do if you can't access shelter? This is particularly, there is a way to do street to housing navigation. It's, it's useful. So think about having somebody who can play that sort of role to engage people. And I think you already do. Be persistent about getting beds from other shelters. And we're watching the city of Biddeford and Sanford both now working at encampment situations that they're encountering and solving them by partnering with local shelters. Biddeford is using Seeds of Hope and moving people into chairs there, buying essentially those beds on a nightly basis, using general assistance to pay for it, which means that 70% of the cost is being borne by the state, 30% by the municipality. Excuse me, and Sanford is using the York County shelter system. So it is possible to negotiate with existing shelters and figure out a way to happen. I know Portland's been reluctant to that. That's a relatively new thing. I think further negotiation. Yeah.
And I think that's where we'll stop for a second
Yes.
to talk about these, because these are some policy options for us. And one of the things that the larger group that we've been working with and other providers really did that suggestion. Hey, why don't you negotiate with Portland to have, 2 or 3 beds that you could buy when we needed it. And I'll let Lauren, because she did. the
It was a hard
investigation.
no.
Yeah.
They pretty much told us that, I mean, Liam, you were in that conversation a little bit, but pretty much even though they had empty beds, 10 to 20 on a daily night, they said that in case they get an influx of Portland residents, which is who they are funded by the city of Portland and focused on Portland residents, they could not allow us to rent those beds. It's a little frustrating because again, I mean, like I follow the empty beds that they have, and there were nights in the winter that they had 30 to 50 empty beds, and I would call them and say, hey, look, we have a Scarborough resident, can I put them up for 2 nights? I'll follow up with them tomorrow. Nope, sorry, they're not a Portland resident. I'm like, are you kidding me?
So I'll just speak to that just a little bit and say
Sure.
that what you have here, I think, is the antidote. It makes sense for a service-centric community to actually meet the emergency needs of the population and the kind of surrounding towns to create housing to really broadly meet the needs of affordable housing demands. You're doing it. I think, it would sound pretty ridiculous to the city that we're not going to allow anyone from Portland to live in Scarborough because this is our housing, right? Sounds equally ridiculous, and yet that's what is being proposed there. And so it's about talking, I think, to the right person with the right mindset and getting a bigger decision. And remember, this is a new framework for Portland. It was not the case just a few years ago. And there was push like, we should only serve people in Portland. Well, if every community only serves people in their own community, it doesn't work. And that's a failed strategy.
Colin, to that point, yeah, I think there's, at least I know for me and maybe others, this sense that if you over-resource, people are smart and they find out where resources are, and everybody will be magnetized to where our resources are.
Yeah.
Is that a reality? Is that a myth?
It's a myth.
How do you protect against that?
Yeah.
How do you deal with that?
So it is true that with homeless shelters, the adult single population with the highest need is likely to migrate to lowest barrier shelter because of being kicked out of other shelters. Remember, there's like 42 shelters in the state. A lot of them are kind of mom and pop shops where you have in one bedroom a family with small children, in the next bedroom, an adult male that's 42 and may have a mental illness. And what happens is you find very quickly is that adult male with the behavioral issues does not mix well with the 7-year-old child, and guess who gets kicked out? So that adult keeps working their way down until finally they get to a single adult shelter that doesn't have children, and their behaviors are a lot more tolerable. Other than that, people don't go because they're, it's homestead. I'll give you an example. Last year, we saw this huge increase of unsheltered homelessness. And I'll get a slide that describes it later, but we went from 60 tents outside in March of 2023 to 282 tents at a peak of October 7th, 7 months later. That's a huge increase. I ran the Oxford Street shelter when it created its final capacity of 154 beds in 1997 or 8. That final capacity lasted for 25 years until 2023, when they moved to the new homeless service center, which had a capacity of 208. 208 is not much different than 154. And the Oxford Street shelter was overflowing and showing a need of about 200 people or so. Now, think about that. 25 years, very modest increase in terms of numbers. And that shelter's been there all along. 7 months of unsheltered chaos, and you saw how many fold increase in terms of homelessness in the city. So actually, when you properly meet the need, it doesn't actually attract more people. It just meets the need and keeps it from getting explosive. When you don't meet the need, you see it start to get explosive because people go outside, they're left to their own devices, and then you really have got a problem. So I just want to, it isn't yet that people are all coming from some other place. I am not from Maine, technically. I spent all my summers here. My parents, I ended up living here. I came here because I had small kids at the time, thought, well, they'll be in the same state. That made sense to me. I had connections to Maine. I bet if you ask almost anybody who's moved to Maine, it's for some reason. But if you ask anybody within the homeless arena, it's probably for the same reason. What we track are zip codes. What was the zip code you stayed in last night? If they tried to make a go of it down in Massachusetts, or they heard a buddy, maybe you could put them up down here, it failed and they come back up. The zip code looks like they're from Massachusetts, even though they were in Portland 2 days ago, or they're in Maine, all their life. So it's not a good metric, but it leads this conclusion that people are coming from all over. This looks the same all across the country. It's been like 30 people come from other states, 30 people other parts of your same state, 30 people from other. That's pretty common.
And then we talk about housing, and we're a housing group, right?
Yeah.
So it's a good thing to talk about. But in between housing, like when you're not being housed, people do things during the day.
Yes.
Right. And do you ever think about how a community supports that? And I think there's a thought or a mentality that we can't support a community of panhandlers and people walking around doing whatever all day long, and so we're scared of serving the population. And is that a myth, a reality, or something to deal with?
Oh,
how do you think about that?
I think every single town is going to face challenging members of its population that have, issues, challenges, face poverty, are struggling. And it's really going to always be, you have to kind of figure out how to make that work. So, yeah, I don't know that myth or reality, but I do think that the incidence of poverty is very consistent. The incidence of mental illness has been consistent for millennia. Same with substance use disorder, even though we've moved from things that were relatively simple, like alcohols, and where somebody could expect to live out a pretty long life, versus opioids, where somebody could die today or at this minute because they're just ended up having fentanyl mixed in. So, all right, I'll just flip through a few more things. So general assistance is your friend is a way to use that. Portland's using it, Bangor is using it, and allowing that as a resource is really important to use here.
And I'll just speak that really, really quickly, that we are very creative with our general assistance program, which is, I think, something that really has been helpful. And to speak to your point, I was a little worried if we're this creative, or other people going to start to kind of come to Scarborough. We haven't seen like that influx of people, because we are, I don't want to say lenient, but we're very creative in the way that we try to keep somebody housed with some limits, right? Like if we're doing this, we expect them to do A, B, and C. And we're working with them to support them to do it, because we know how hard it is for someone who's vulnerable to carry out A, B, and C. And sometimes they need that navigation piece of it. So we're definitely trying to
Really
do that with
wise
general
move,
assistance.
really wise move, and I don't think you'll see negative consequences for that. When you meet people's needs, they do the best.
Has the phenomenon of homelessness dramatically changed over the last 50, 75 years? Did we have just as large a percentage of the population in the greater Portland area homeless 50 years ago as we do today?
No, actually, homelessness essentially was invented in around 1981. We've always had some. There were people who were, there were bread lines and other things during the Great Depression. We've always had little pockets of homelessness. But in 1981, the government decided to cut HUD's budget almost in half. The last time we created an adequate supply of affordable housing was in late 1970s. So right around that same time, we stopped producing the kind of affordable housing that the whole society needed. We cut HUD's budget in terms of allowing affordability, things like Section 8, which leveled the playing field for people who couldn't afford it. We've known since the 1930s that if somebody's paying more than 30% of their income towards housing, they're in trouble. They can't keep up with everything else. That formula is the same in 2024 as it was in 1930. And so that's that. The third thing is that we did the right thing by deinstitutionalizing population and moving them out the community. We did the wrong thing by not following up with housing for the population. We didn't follow up with services. We sort of left people to their own devices. So that group fell into homelessness. It's been a cohort we've been watching since 1981 all the way through, and now people are dying of old age, at my age, as if they're in their 80s, in their 50s. And we're watching that left and right to a person because of the chronic stress of what's been happening for them the last, 30 years or so. So it's really been in recent years. You didn't have homeless shelters until the late 80s. And so the one in Portland, the one in Bangor, the one in York County, all right around 1987, a reaction to a growing number of people who were on shelters. Maine said, let's create some shelters just to kind of manage the problem. But we didn't solve it with housing or the services that really solve the problem. So that's where we are. So I've got answers. So we invented this, we can fix it.
Yeah.
If we actually right the ship in terms of having adequate supply of affordable housing, we should expect that, 80% of our homelessness will end. We're still going to have people who fall into homelessness because of being victims of domestic violence. We're going to still have some youth who fall into homelessness because they run away and can't be reunited with their family, though most can. We are still going to see some people fall in hard times, but we should be able to house people who have serious and persistent mental illness. We should be able to solve people with needs with substance use disorder, and we should easily be able to more immediately through creative moves like general assistance, adaptability to meeting needs, solve the needs of the mass group. So we can solve this. Okay, I talked about the Portland situation. That's the numbers. When they opened a shelter on November 30th, within an hour, 120 people who were asylum seekers essentially were higher functioning and be able to access that resources. It was first come, first serve. This is a population that's very skilled, figured out how to be first in line. The people who were less skilled with that system were the people who had serious and persistent mental illness. That group largely started to show up outside, 60 people out, 60 tents outside, growing to 282. When we opened that shelter and added 50 beds because we had a crisis of so many, that immediately brought in 90% of the people who were unsheltered within 2 months. Okay, 85% in the first 5 weeks. So we had 30 tents outside in February. We have 26 today. Okay, it stayed right either side of 30 the whole time. I was operating on a mindset that there were between 40 and 50 people outside in Portland as of last week. Today, I learned that actually there are 64 people who are outside. They did a head count of people who are actually sleeping outside. But there's a lot more people who are kind of hanging about outside using substances. They want to go right into encampment if we opened it up. But that's not what's happening. So, and then I talked about this overdose statistic, pretty significant. Okay. So our numbers of people unsheltered are actually lower now this year than they were the last 10 years because of having capacity. So it's not that we're seeing more homelessness, we're actually seeing less. And then you have to start subtracting the people who've housed. I want to go through this thing. This is about people with serious and persistent mental illness, substance use disorder. This population is extremely expensive. And here's why. They ricochet through jail, they ricochet through hospitals. If anybody has gone to an emergency room with yourself or a parent or something, it's a pretty good chance that the person will have a bed in the hallway because the emergency room is so overcrowded, they can't fit everybody in. Same with the jails, and they're actually, when they don't have enough people to staff it, they're thinking about not charging people because they don't have a place to put people. Both of these institutions are crowded because a small group of people are there very frequently. It's not because we have more crime, it's not because we have more health issues, it's because we have a small segment of the population that's there pretty regularly, taking up space. What we found is that same population, when we house them, and this is real actual data, because we've been tracking it on a by name list basis for the last three some years, that the same population is up to 29 times more likely to be in the hospital and up to 57 times more likely to be in jail when unhoused than when housed. And I'll show you statistically how that works out, but it's remarkable. So here's this cycle. Here's how you get it solved. You move people out of homelessness into housing. Once people are housed, they have a 90% success rate. Even the most complicated people have a 90% success rate, not just in this area, but all across the country and everywhere where we've housed people with permanent supportive housing. This works. They stop touching the emergency system once we house them. Good news is that we know how to do it. You need a person to help somebody get into housing. You need a person more and more now because housing is harder to find. There's more people coming from other, and this does happen. This is not a myth. We've had in-migration of people who've like, hey, work remotely for a job in New York or Boston, get paid this level and enjoy lovely Maine. And so they're moving in, they're buying housing, they're grabbing up apartment buildings. Some are being turned into Airbnbs. So it's harder to find the kind of housing that we had just a few years ago before the pandemic. So you need somebody who can navigate that and actually level the playing field for somebody who might have had some, incidences in their background of a poor rental history, or they touch the jail. And I want to pause here. Why do people go to jail? So in this population, it's not that what we found for hundreds of people on binding lists that we've been tracking for the last 9 years, something like 6 went to prison, meaning that they had sentences that lasted longer than 6 months. The rest are in jail for like a week or 2 or 3, right? And they're picked up because you maybe have experienced this, but in the privacy of a home, it is possible for adults to get into arguments with each other and for that to get heated. And that happens pretty commonly. If that happens in the privacy of home, probably nobody knows about it, it goes away. But if that happens outside, on the street next to a business, they call the police because it sounds like something bad's going on out there. And so that person, what's the police do? They pick the person up. Well, I don't know where to put them. We'll put them in jail. They get in jail. The criminal justice system takes a while to get through. They're stuck in there. By the way, when they're in jail for 2 weeks, I got to find out the average length, but let's say 2 weeks. 2 weeks of jail at $943 a day. That's the equivalent we're paying in that emergency setting for something like they got in an argument. To housing that person for an entire year. Do the math. It's $11,000, $12,000 for somebody to be in housing for the entire year. It's another $3,000 if they need permanent supportive housing for somebody who's part of a caseload of like 35 people. So we can pay the most expensive intervention is permanent supportive housing intervention. It costs less than a little more than 2 weeks of somebody going to jail, which is happening all the time. Think about hospitals, $1,000 a day there. That's even more expensive. Plus, have you gone to the hospital or bill or anything? It's then there's more, and then there's this and there's that. Now remember about the good news, we can house people from homeless shelters. That's pretty typical, but we can also house people directly from the hospital. We can also house people directly from jail. We don't have to wait till they get to a shelter. We can actually have a housing navigator track and stay with the person while they're ricocheting and say, we're just going to get you in housing no matter where you land in the emergency system. We can do it from anywhere. And again, it's just about having a housing navigator that follows the person, cranks them out into housing. And then we need to make sure that we coordinate that, because if somebody over here is trying to house somebody when they're homeless, but when they go to jail, we don't talk to the people, well, then all progress stops. And if they go to the hospital, privacy and everything else, all progress stops. So it's about connecting those dots, having people talk to one another. So continuity of care is really important. Any kind of housing works. If you add services, it becomes supportive housing. You can have this take forms of, you may have heard of housing first. That has 3 forms in itself. Scattered site, you just put somebody with rental assistance into an apartment, follow up with support services, that's housing first. Or it's a building somebody goes into and a whole bunch of people are sort of, they live there and nobody else lives there. That's a site-based type of, or it's blended where, you know, a number of people live in this or this part of the building. They take the units on this floor or whatever else, wherever they happen to land. And a service provider can go in and serve every single one of them just by knocking the doors. Recovery residences for people with substance use are a very effective model, helps people to transition into wellness. And then we have these ultra low barrier models that we're experiencing with. They all work. And what's needed is that you have services to follow to make sure people are successful in their housing. So when you're thinking about your plan, think about follow-up services to make sure that these people who have been causing problems when they're homeless also get support once they're in housing. And it doesn't take that much support. Because remember, somebody who, I'll describe sort of people with serious and persistent mental illness. If people are in the thick of psychosis, it's sort of like their vision is blocked because they're attending to, you know, delusions or hallucinations or other intrusive thoughts. When you subtract that stress by moving people in the housing, you essentially move all those symptoms to the side. Now, maybe they're thinking, oh yeah, the CIA is still there, but now you have a direct pathway to a conversation. Hey, it looks like you need a bed. Hey, it looks like you've got people who are coming over and that's going to undo your lease. Don't you want to stay here? What can we do to help you get your friends who've been in the trenches with you from coming over here and sabotaging your apartment? Those kind of conversations work. You got to do it. You got to go to the place. If you don't, dump somebody in housing, probably not going to be successful. You reduce the stress, this other stuff, friends, whatever else. Mostly friends that sabotage, by the way. Meaning well, they just want to be there, you know, but it creates a, again, carnival. So housing makes sense. Services makes really good sense. And it doesn't take very much once somebody's clear. You've got to step across the threshold because you can tell. I tell you, I house 1,256 people and I have 220 of them are chronically homeless. I can set 1 foot inside the threshold and tell whether things are going okay or not. It is either just like this room, pretty organized, you know what's going on and everything, or it is chaos. And it's really night and day. So it's like this person, things are not going well, or this person, it's going okay. Just takes a step across the threshold. It may not be a whole lot more than that. Everything going okay and you good. I'm right here. I'll check in it again, you know. But if you don't do that, you won't know when things are going downhill, and they do.
So Cullen, if we're a town, which we are,
Yeah.
and people provide housing, which we don't, but private landlords do.
Yeah.
Well, is there something for us to look for in a housing partner to be a thoughtful partner like you are?
Well, we're doing advocacy to try to make sure that all housing has provisions to be inclusive of all populations. So that's on the outside, and it's a slow change, but hopefully more and more housing will be welcomed. But what makes the difference is services. So something you can do as a town is to have somebody who works for your town or partners for your town who is there to deliver services to help people get in housing and to stay in housing. For your relatively small population, that's a pretty easy caseload, a fairly manageable, not an easy one, but totally doable. And that makes a difference between that housing being, oh, well, we can't take people like that, to yes, that could work. And if you're able to help with leveling the playing field for people in terms of rent, that's going to make all the difference. Okay, I'm almost done here. So here's the statistics I was talking about that allow us to see that people are 57 times and 29 times more likely to be in the jail or the hospital. So what we actually looked at was 39-month average, 12-month average, or peaks. So these are real data, and I'll show you how it works. So in May of 2024, we had 106 people who were not yet housed. That's the top upper right box that you see, or just down from a little notch there. And out of those 106 people who were not yet housed, 20 of them were in jail on the last day of the month that we checked in, which was, you know, May, the fourth Thursday of the month. Out of the that same group, 5 of the people were in the hospital. That's on a day. That's a pretty large percentage of 106 people to be touching our most expensive institutions. Now, if you look on the house list, which is the sort of green list below, at that time we had 424 people, I think I'm reading it right, who were housed. Not a single person from that 425 people were in jail. 1 person was in the hospital at that time. Okay? Same with the month before. Same with the month before. A couple months before that, in December, you'll see down on the lower right there, Again, we had 140 people yet to house. 12 of them were in jail. 4 of them were in the hospital at that time. We had 421 people who we'd housed, who were still alive, by the way, we housed more like 500. Not a single person touched the jail or the hospital in the house population, but look at how many were touching the jail and the hospital out of a much smaller group. That's real data. That's really what's going on. We look at it every single month. We've been looking at it for 3 years. That's pretty compelling. So when we house people, we can stop people from being in these systems where it costs oodles of money. There was a article, famous article called $1 Million Murray, where they followed one person, I think it was in Phoenix or something like that, somewhere in the Southwest, who everybody knew in the police department, everybody knew in the hospitals, everybody knew, you know, whatever else. And real character, when they figured it all out, this one guy, Murray, had cost this town or city $1 million for being homeless, you know? If they housed him, wouldn't cost very much at all. Most expensive interventions right now is about $16,000 a year. So is $160,000 to be in Riverview for a year. I think that's right. You can do the math in terms of repeated stays of jails and hospitals. So we're going to spend the money. Would you rather spend it constantly putting on emergency? Would you rather just get this small group of people into housing where they're stable and then productive? Okay, so this is the real data. I showed you all that. Final slide. Everybody deserves housing. It's not immediately available. You should make sure that people are indoors. Okay, housing is healthcare and a path to wellness. Chronically homeless populations, most likely the people that you're going to see who are languishing outside, ricochet through our most expensive emergency system, and they stop. We house them. We can do that. Very easy to do. Well, not easy, but if we're focused on it, we can get that done. It is, we know the people by name. Collaborative coordination of services, housing navigation is key. You guys can collaborate with, there's organizations that want to do this, they want to work with you. They're showing up at your lead meetings. You got things going, you got it going on here. And it's a matter of just seeing it through. And then finally, once we house people, even with modest support, they tend to stay housed, they don't return to homelessness, stop ricocheting, and all this is based on relationship. That's all I have. So
It's good 30 minutes. Thanks.
Okay.
I'll just add one, just take away that if you want to do your piece.
No,
too.
no, go ahead.
I'm just gonna say that, so when I was hired 5 years ago, part of my position was, right, to help kind of connect people to the continuity of care, right? And do some of these housing applications and whatnot. I was doing it all the time. It's taking a lot of time and energy. People need, a lot of these folks, like I said before, they can't just be handed 15 applications and say, hey, fill these out. They need somebody sitting there with them, helping them, following up. So then we hired, let's see, the next position was Bailey, who does like my intensive case management for our diversion program. So she has a caseload of like 10 to 15 at a time, and she intensely works with these people and she finds them housing. I mean, that is successful. We showed today at our lead meeting that like 2 people in the last month have been put into secure housing, not in Scarborough, but at least in Cumberland County. And then we hired on general assistance through the town, who's now embedded in the police department, which is very creative and I love it. And I thought was, okay, she can help kind of do some housing, but now her caseload of general assistance has gone up and she is helping, a handful of people with those specific applications, in the details of it. So when you speak to the housing stability specialist, somebody who could dedicate that time, I think is a priority. And we did look at the opioid settlement money to see if we could use some of that to fund that position. Unfortunately, I've been told by the Attorney General's office that really legitimately we can't, which is a bummer, but I think that we do need to keep exploring because I think that so many folks that I'm having contact with, our diversion programs having contact with in general assistance could so benefit from somebody who that's their job. They're doing housing applications. They're following them through and they're checking in even once they've secured housing. So
that statistic of being 32 times more likely to die of fatal overdose when unhoused than when housed. It's really important. And they don't know that. I just did the math pretty recently and I hinted at it in terms of doing back of the napkin, but I actually did the math for all 2023. I think that should be compelling and it might be.
Maybe you and I can present again at the Attorney General's office.
Yes, it would be a good one.
So that's really the focus of, I think, the recommendations that will come out of here is we don't need to build a shelter, we don't need to do
don't.
these other things. What we need is a housing navigator. And whether that's part-time or, you know, it will grow over time, but that's really the focus of, I think, what we've learned from all the work that we've done with Colin's help and with you know, the information from the surveys and things like that. And I mean, that feels really doable from a town's perspective. And what I would say is, you know, the point of the supply piece that I gave you was really about saying Scarborough's been great about adding to the regional housing supply. We have way outpaced, you know, we've done more than our fair share. And you can look through and see some of the numbers. What we need to focus on is this list of affordable housing projects that we have. And if I calculated correctly, and I'm gonna ask you guys to look at the list of projects at some point to say, hey, no, you've got this wrong or whatever, you know, we're about 4% of our total housing is some type of dedicated to affordable or workforce housing. And so I know we have a goal getting up to 10%, but that's the other piece of this. How can we continue to one, supply, make sure there's total regional housing? And I think about like trickle down, like, my God, am I looking at Reagan economics? But you know, more housing provides more opportunity, and we're just in this weird crisis right now. But you know, that's the thing. We need to focus on those types of things that I think are in our DNA and types of things that we do well. And I think affordable housing is something we've been really focused on. And let's at some point, you guys take a look at that list that's in here and let's see if it needs to be refined or added to. And then let's just keep letting people know where we are with the affordable housing.
Yeah, that's great. You know, we talk here not just about affordable housing, but about housing in general, and we talk about supply of housing, but also other ways to make housing more affordable. And you're tackling on one more thing, which is making housing more accessible. And I think that's a nice added dimension for us to think about is, you know, what role does accessibility, not physical accessibility, but you know, make accessibility to the housing for people who might have trouble accessing play in our housing supply. So
It's like the third leg of the stool.
now we've got 3 legs.
Yeah.
That's good. So thank you guys.
Yeah. Sorry we took up all your meeting, but
No, this is a meeting. This is really good stuff. Any other questions or comments or thoughts?
if you guys have more thoughts, email Lauren or I, or Tom. And he will get that information to us, but we're gonna be writing this up and we'll provide you a copy when we're.
Yeah, so what are your next steps in deliverables?
So the grant ends on the 30th of June,
Oh.
so it's
Next one,
one
Abby.
grant.
Oh, all right.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
But we're gonna be putting all this material together in a final report, which probably, I'm gonna say mid-July before we get everything buttoned up and feel good about. So we'll get that to you guys first to take a look at.
And then who does that go to?
That's to the town council.
Oh,
It's
great.
us, you know,
Yep.
the planning grant was for the community to plan for itself, so.
Will the final report have some guidance, direction and recommendations?
I think the clear recommendation for us is this idea of a housing navigator. Maybe not today, but you know, that's the recommendation, that it's staffing, not shelter, that needs to be done.
Mhm.
And continued focus on the supply of affordable and workforce housing.
Okay.
I don't think we need to do anything to promote more housing necessarily. It seems to be going on its own, but we need to promote a certain type of housing.
Certain type.
Yeah. And that really is one of the changes too that we've seen with the last few years of development, and even back into the 2015 to 2020, we've seen a lot of multifamily being built. So that diversifies our housing stock. It provides apartments. There's more choice in Scarborough right now.
can we house some of the people you're talking about in all this housing that we developed? I don't think so.
No, well, that's exactly it. This pocket of affordability, affordable housing, we don't necessarily have the products right yet.
Right.
But we're certainly doing our share.
So step one really is professional staff to be able to assist with the people who are homeless.
Right. And the one thing I will say from here, because I did sort of back of the envelope, checking, the state has a housing plan. And it has assigned a certain amount of growth, that 28,000 units, in the coastal communities by 2030. We again are punching way above our weight on that number. If you break it down to Cumberland County, that's about 2,000 houses, a little over 2,000. And we are certainly, if you take our share of housing, we're like double the amount of housing that we would be required if there was an assignment, and there isn't, just to be clear. But if someone were trying to calculate, hey, are we pulling our fair share? We certainly are.
Would our affordable housing committee present to the town council? This is a budget issue. We're gonna propose certain staffing to address this. And that budget would come up in the late winter, early spring of 2025.
And I think we'll continue to do some research. I mean, with Colin and I can certainly research more around, even though the opioid settlement money couldn't fully fund this, one thing that definitely came up is, could we use half the settlement money and then half town funding, to make it more? What they were kind of saying to me was, people are gonna come and utilize this housing stability specialist that are not depending upon opioids or her in the recovery process. I said, yeah, that's gonna happen. I can't tell you everyone coming in that's unhoused or needing help with some housing applications has an opioid problem, right? There's a significant amount, there's a large percentage, but because not 100%, and those funds are really to be used towards opioid and substance use, that's where they were kind of getting a little bit of pushback. And so I think that we can use some of that funding. I don't think we're asking for the full position. It's just being able to maybe match that. I also want to say this position would not just be working with the unhoused, that they can also work with somebody who's about to lose housing. And again, it's doing simple tasks with this person that just is not able to do it themselves. And I get myself and my team can do that to a degree. We just don't have the time to be doing it as a dedicated position, if that makes sense.
Will this navigator talk about, regional, like cooperative efforts, and is that part of what this liaison will do? I mean, otherwise, we're not gonna have the housing in Scarborough.
Right, I think they would have to know regional availability. I mean, again, like our diversion program just placed someone, I think it was in Topsom. And that was because she knows where some housing is available and where some apartment, she works with the owners of some apartments that are willing to take some very vulnerable
So
people.
connect with the other navigators in the other towns, so
Yeah.
this is a broader solution.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Making relationships with some of those landlords and et cetera.
Yep.
It's good.
It's helpful too. I've listened to this for a while, but I think it's really, and one of the things that's resonated with me over time is to make the distinction between short term. I think people in the general one size fits all around homelessness. And to the extent we can talk about, long-term stayers, short-term stayers and their needs, and then the difference between an asylum seeker and someone who's chronically homeless, start kind of breaking that down, and the problem seems to get more manageable. And I think anything we can do, either as a committee or when we're asked, is to kind of emphasize how these things, need different solutions. Yeah, I mean, I've heard Colin talk about the short-term stay, like that's solvable. They don't want to be there. They want 2 or 3 nights.
Yeah.
I'm in, I'm out, help me. And then the long term, got a little more complication. But, number is not, it's not the same. And the distinction between them, and so much, it gets so much more confusing when asylum seekers are layered into the mix and their needs and their capacity to turn things around.
just so you know, there's like 300 people who are chronically homeless in the entire state of Maine.
Yeah.
So it's a really small,
Mm.
distinct population. So you might, out of the 12 or 13, you might have one or two that meet this, and you have others that are just on hard times and stuck, you know. They're really simple to solve, others who you can prevent, who don't have really any issues at all. So doing, having a approach that can solve all those needs is really smart.
Plus, I think using your information, we can debunk the concepts out there that people have, because they read about them or they've been told X. And I just think that the information that Colin has provided us just gives us some ability to let's dissect this issue, and let's talk about the things that can really make a difference, and let's debunk some of the theories that people have.
Oh, it's really encouraging when you talk about, we know the answer for each of these groups, right? And to your point, it sounds really digestible, right? It's been really encouraging. And, it also makes me wonder if there's some tools available to help identify a problem that we might not know we have. And I think particularly with the schools, so, whether there's some, things you might spot with, some school age populations that might indicate homelessness or emerging homelessness that might not be apparent. And whether there's.
Yeah,
services.
there are, and there's actually, by law, there is a McKinney-Vento response, and there is a person in each school district that's responsible for managing that. And it's a surprising number of youth who show either prevalence or there's a pattern of some sort of homelessness within their family. And the opioid issue has really exacerbated that. But yeah, you can tell if you hop in there early and support a family and solve these kinds of needs, prevent that homeless, not only for just that kid, the entire family, but for other parts of the generation.
Yeah.
Beyond it, you really stop the whole cycle. That also fits with almost many of the other issues that we have.
Yeah.
So it is about, sort of reading the room and solving it. Right.
And I am working very closely with the school social workers, just so you go around with that, and if they spot somebody getting them hooked up with some services. When we ended the school year, there were 15 people on my caseload that were either high school students experiencing being unhoused, or a family like within the community, like a middle schooler or elementary school kid who either was unhoused or about to be unhoused. So the social workers are doing an excellent job identifying those, and then they'll call me up and be like, hey, so what do I do now? But exactly, the McKinney-Vento liaison as well has been super helpful. I think we're all working as a team to try to do that. But I will say that in my 5 years here, this year, significantly an uptick. I think we didn't hear about it maybe, through COVID as much, as kids weren't going to school and, disclosing what was happening. So.
I'll add one more layer. We're in Upper Appalachia here in Maine, and we're 12.5% poverty rate. If you do the math, that's 170,000 people who are in poverty in Maine. It's only 6,000 people who fall into homelessness. That's 4%, meaning 96% of the population in poverty doesn't touch homelessness, but they're in trouble, And so being a proactive approach to actually deal with that little 4% that's going to emerge is really important, because then you're also set up to meet the needs of people who is a whole lot of them, 96% more, are out there who can fall into the problem. So that diversion is really important. Connecticut attributes reducing their homelessness by 53% by having an effective diversion program. It doesn't mean you go out and try to find the 170,000 people who are you and what do you need. They show up. They'll show up. I just wasn't able to pay rent. I'm stuck and I'm going to get kicked out now. If your general assistance responsive, let's fix that. You don't need to fall into homelessness here. Let's keep you in your housing. Great, that's what I want to do. And the kids are already in school, and that stalls thousands of problems. So yeah.
Thank you all.
Thank
you.
Yeah, thank you all for your time. This is great.
Thanks.
And just thank you to Scarborough. You guys are being really proactive. I wish all the municipalities would do this. It's excellent. So well done.
Great.
Sounds like this will be a matter before us for a while.
I think so. Yeah. And, particularly we do a lot of, tax credit, well, not a lot, but we do tax credit housing here in town. And I think some of our frustrations are that they tend to serve the high income of low, right? And so it's nice to be able to think about how do we serve the super vulnerable within the population. So
and people in the service industry, which is a lot of what's going on in the workforce, are very quickly getting priced out of the
Sure.
housing options. And that's where you're seeing families in crisis and
Yeah.
kids facing homelessness because you can't make ends meet, got a growing crisis coming. So it's getting ahead of it.
Yeah.
Really smart. Thank you all.
Karen,
Thank you.
Karen, could you stick around for a minute? I need an update from you on,
Sure.
on a problem. Our next agenda,
Three at home.
I know.
Happy to say.
Thanks,
Bye,
guys.
guys.
Thanks to all of you.
Great. Yes, we've got, so that was terrific.
Yeah, it was great. Yeah.
Thanks for bringing that to us. Yeah,
Sorry to go long, but you know,
it was a great half hour.
good.
So we've got an innovative project coming to town, and it's on our agenda for a brief discussion and update. Karen, I was just checking an email and I know that we've been told a really great update, and I think you know more than me
Yes.
about it.
Yeah, so
Three Eye Home project.
they did receive main housing funding, and so they're ready to move forward. They've got what they need, and we're just so excited. I know,
This is huge.
we've been working with them.
This is terrific.
I know, it is just an amazing project. And I think it's representing the best of Scarborough and the best of the Downs. And certainly the best of the proponents of this project. It is, I think, everything we would have hoped a downtown area could be, or, you know, the center. Because it takes advantage of, number one, it's physically designed for people with mobility issues. So curb cuts are, not curb cuts, but the curbing is flat. You can roll right out of or walk right out of your apartment into the heart of the Downs. And so it's walkable. They're have access to jobs within the reach, within the Downs and other places. But it's like the most heartwarming
Yeah.
project ever.
And has it generally stayed the same scope wise,
Well,
Karen?
the thing that has changed over time, from the first time we looked at it, is they have done a deeper dive on affordability. So it started out like 80%, and now all the units, I think, are down to 60%.
Oh, wow. So-
Yeah, so they've really worked on that. And
Oh, thank you.
I'm not sure when they're breaking ground, but I still think it's
Announcement
2026.
2025.
Yeah, breaking ground, but like completing, I think,
Okay,
2026, yeah, opening. But Tom, 3i Home, I mean, just,
They got the major award earlier this spring.
Yep.
Yeah, I think 2026 would be the explanation. Sounds right.
yeah,
And in some ways, you know, if these are delays, well, let's say in some ways this timing is great because there's been a lot of growing up around the site over at the Downs.
Yeah.
There's some new buildings that have cropped up. I don't know if they were originally planned, but they're up now. And
Mhm.
I think there's some more commercial that's growing up around it, so it won't feel quite as isolated as it might have originally.
No, in fact, the
So-
3i site, you can now really
It is.
appreciate how,
Yeah.
it is a site of prominence. It's
Yeah,
one of the,
it's
Yeah.
it's
super.
one of the most iconic sites in the whole
Yeah,
development. So
right. And I love the fact that it's, you know, cutting edge of, you know, of the building structure, like, you know, the lights will come on with the voice activated lights. There's all this technology involved in the project. So it's an incredible.
And talking to Paul and that too, he talks about the Scarborough being of some of the other developments in the night too, which is pretty
Oh, really?
exciting.
Yeah.
The fact that everything could then come focused.
Right.
And this would be like headquarters.
Yeah,
and
Paul-
for the technology.
Paul seems to think that this is gonna be kind of a national spotlight on this
Good. That's
project.
And
I mean,
it
I'm
is
just
a
hoping-
beautiful structure. The architecture is beautiful.
No, and like he's talking about the Rue Institute doing.
Oh,
like,
really?
some of the technical design of
Nice.
the place, so it's got a lot of local appeal.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And
Yeah, and the town certainly has a piece that we're doing a credit enhancement with them.
Mhm.
Then you guys gave them some additional funding, so it's happy all around.
Yeah.
It's nice when things come together.
Yes. Good stuff.
Nice to be in a town that's doing good things.
It is.
Yes. Great. Couple of grand openings coming up, or that.
Happened
that
last
came
week,
up?
yeah, very proud week. I had the privilege of attending two grand ribbon cuttings or grand openings. First was at Village Commons. 31 units of affordable housing. Yeah, great project. And then 2 days later, we did Jocelyn Place. I think Bill was there in the stifling heat that day. April Sider, Councilor Sider spoke at both of them. I think provided really excellent remarks.
Yeah, she did.
From the heart, and yeah, it was just a really proud moment for us there, I think.
Yes. I remember those tours, and those tours were super, it must be great to see them open and running and.
Yeah, I will also just really, I had the occasion to bump into Mark Wisendanger at both events, and he was the praise he gave to Scarborough and kind of the support we've provided through this
Oh, wow.
committee and through the town council. It's just nice to hear it from his perspective. He has an appreciation statewide, so we think we're really, working hard and not showing much results. That gave me a little comfort that we still got a lot of work to do, but we're doing better than most, right?
Nice.
I got a note from somebody on Portland Housing Authority, it was random, it was somebody I knew long ago, he sent me a note and he goes, I can't believe all the really good things that Scarborough is doing, and I thought that was pretty nice and unsolicited.
Yeah.
Congratulations to you guys.
Really good.
Wow.
Nice. That's really nice.
And there's a couple of other things in the works that I'm not in a position to talk about, but some other really interesting projects that I hope will come forward.
Great. Stay tuned. Come to a future meeting. Great. Well, next is public comment. Do we have any people in public that have tuned in? Nope.
They're all at the concert.
We've been talking about the concert and the debate tonight.
And they're all wet. Looking out the window, it was just pouring
Oh, it
for
was,
about 20 minutes.
oh, I missed that.
Yeah, about 45 minutes ago.
Yeah.
But they were all out there and it was coming down in buckets.
All right, one last item on the agenda. Adjournment.